to talk a little bit about the history, where we're sitting here today. Also, I'll whip through the other sections of town we've kind of talked a little bit about, then we'll open up for any questions you have on this, on the city, anything that's on your mind tonight. So with that, I'd always like to start 1927, big deal in Northville, our centennial. Let's get in the mood of Northville being 100 years old. We're getting ready to be 200 years old. With that, let's let her rip. And it's the same streets that we have today, if you look really closely, same buildings. We've been the same downtown since the mid-1800s. That's my dad's head, they tell me. He was about an 8 or 9 year old. And he wanted to be up here. Maybe I'll be up here someday. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll get out of your way. Tell that mayor to move, for God's sakes. Don't be polite, just tell me.
Oh, there's Indians here.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And when you think about it, horse and buggy, about 20 years before, that's how you got around Northville. You know, that's like a 20-year-old car. It's like a 2004 model year car. It's called the horse. It's an amazing thing. So it wasn't just things for fun. They were riding those horses to town not too long ago. And those stagecoaches came right through town. Remember, Northville was a booming place. Trains and stagecoaches and trolleys. You're going down Center Street there or something. Electric car, I say we haven't gone very far because we're still working on those electric cars, aren't we? Okay. And the Northville Band. And this was the old fire engine. They just got a brand new 1927 model year fire engine that is down in Ohio. We're going to get it back here for our bicentennial. They're pretty proud of that new beast. As I usually say, Pasadena didn't have anything on us. We decorated all our cars and floats with flowers. And the churches all had different floats. In fact, I'm getting together with the clergy next week talking about, that's my grandmother and grandfather driving the Model T pick-em-up truck, Northville Electric. Lumbering was big here. We had the first mills in the state of Michigan right in this area. Lumber and grist mills for corn and wheat. You think that's really old, but that was probably about, 50, 60 years before this. Mr. Stinson used to do the single-wing planes, the first modern planes in the world out of Northville. They're in the Smithsonian and down at the Henry Ford Museum. A lot of bakeries, bread. Again, the churches with all their different floats. They're going to do it again. They just don't know it yet. And that's Mr. Mayberry from Mayberry State Park. So that kind of gets you an idea of what we were when this was Buckner Hill. So today, usually Northville has 4 historic areas. I'm going to make 5 out of it today. So the 5th one up here in the Buckner Hill area, which is part of the historic area in town. I'll talk about the other areas, the historic area of Bealtown, Cabbagetown, and Orchard Heights briefly, but I'll go a little bit more in detail about where you live today. And at the end, if you have any questions, I'll try to answer them all. So with that, let's go to the next one. And this is Wendy Mudge, the archivist at Millrace Village that knows all the answers of life about history. She keeps me straight on that stuff. So Buckner Hill, kind of give you an idea, and you are in Buckner Hill, and we'll talk about what that meant. Buckner Hill cleared the land in 1885, and you had a big house on the top. We'll look at it. 1890s, the hill is used for bicycle hill climbing competitions. new automobiles are tested going up that big hill, and motorcycles trying to go up that hill. We've digitized all the Northville records, so I go back, looking at history, going back to 1869, we have every Northville record digitized, so when we're looking for different information on the hill up here. Dr. Wickham opens East Lawn Sanitarium for TB treatments up here in 1923. 1955, Lawrence Keller buys the property and converts it to a convalescence center. And I know about that. I used to see it all the time in the 60s when I walked all the way up to the high school and to where Northville Swim Club is. I go by it all the time and wave to everybody in there. Went from a TV center to a convalescence center. The city buys East Lawn in 1975. 1976, the mansion was taken down, the Buckner Mansion. We have a beautiful case with stained glass and Tiffany glass in it at City Hall. That was from the Buckner Mansion, so we still have that at City Hall. Allen Terrace, which you see here today, 1978, we opened that up. So thank you very much to your father at the time. So with that, let's take a look a little bit. So a book in 1890 talked about Northville being the ideal suburban village, the greatest village in all of America. This is the view from Buckner Hill. This was a picture in the book looking down on Northville. This is the highest point in Wayne County. We drop hundreds of feet all the way to the Detroit River. When somebody says they live downriver, did anybody used to live downriver in here? You live downriver from Northville, Michigan, because it runs downriver from Northville all the way to the city of Detroit, to the Detroit River, to the Great Lakes. So this was in that book, and that book is around, this is the greatest value for $3. I believe nobody sells these things, but this is a reprint of the 1890 book, Northville, the Ideal Suburban Village, but the picture's in there. I'm not selling books tonight. I know she does once in a while. The next one. So this is looking from down the hill up to Buckner Hill. That's the Buckner Mansion on top of the hill behind us. So that is looking down from Randolph Street, looking all the way up there. So you have the Lutheran Church on the right-hand side, and you have that all the way up the hill. That little pathway is still there. That's where I'm sure we're going to get to it, the tobogganing came right down that area. But you can see, not much going on. They just put some electricity. See the poles on either side? My grandfather helped electrify Northville about this time. Next one. Sledding and tobogganing were infamous on Buckner Hill. The sledding hill was almost a mile long. You started on top of Buckner Hill and you ended down by Northville Downs. Kids would be at the different streets in the whole bit. My dad, who was born in 1919, was the president of 1937. In the 20s, the kids would come down. They would get 3, 4, 5 people on a toboggan. They go 50, 55 miles an hour coming down that hill. And that would get you all the way to Northville Downs at the time. Detroit News talked about it, the Free Press, everybody talked about the the sledding hill in Northville. Some people tried to ski it. It wasn't good. Next one. So East Lawn. This was an advertisement for East Lawn Sanitarium. Kind of like we just had COVID. They didn't know a cure for, tuberculosis. Clean air, fresh air out in the country. That's the definition of Northville. The highest point in Wayne County, all the way up to the corner of Wayne County. That's why Mayberry Sanitarium came here, almost 1,000 acres. That was from the city of Detroit. That was the farthest things out in Wayne County. This was a private sanitarium up here, right on top of the hill. What they did, I think we have a picture. Oh, you can see in the corner, that's really the Buckner Mansion, and then they just added on. on both sides for different rooms on the first story and the second story. So again, if you look at the bottom right, or the bottom left, you can see the Buckner oh, thank you very much. Oh, you can't because you're slipping. So that is the Buckner Mansion. Point to the Buckner Mansion, and they added on all those rooms to the Convalescent Center. And in the upper one, that is a corner of the Buckner Mansion, up a little closer. They added on the first and second story. And they had multiple cottages all around. You could be in a room at the Convalescent Center or at the TB Center before it was a Convalescent Center, or you could be in a little cottage, depending on how sick you were with TB and the whole bit, if you had to be isolated. Even in Life magazine, they had a group of young ladies out here that were famous for singing and imitating, different groups at the time. And this
They
was
were patients.
And they were patients in the TB Center. And Life magazine came out here in 1937. Let's go to the next one. So now in the 1940s, 12 cottages on Buckner Hill were started. It was now accommodations of 100 patients who were up here. You can see the cottages on the bottom right, and some patients would be up in the different rooms. So the 40s, they were still battling TB in this area, from 30s and the 40s. Unlike COVID, there was no cure yet. They didn't come up with that. You have to collapse one lung and then collapse the other one and work at it one at a time. There's after that, and that they found with the medication, they could come up with a cure, but it took decades and decades, as you know. Go ahead. So that's a pretty good picture. That's the corner of East Lawn, and that's the Buckner Mansion. And back in the day, they said, when it was a Buckner Mansion, from that third story, you could see Detroit going east, and you could see Ann Arbor going west. The trees weren't quite as high in different areas, and no buildings were around. So you could see almost east and west as far as you possibly could see from really the crow's nest on the third floor. But you can see where they expanded. That's what it looked like when I was a kid in the 60s, walking by it each and every day, walking up the back hill and waving to people. It was a convalescent center then. TB had been cured, but that converted over to a convalescent center at the time. Next one. So this shows you in 1975, the Buckner Mansion was starting to be demolished. That picture on the bottom, that is 1976. I remember this. I was 16 years old, and the Buckner Mansion was coming down. That's where they saved a huge cabinet with all this fancy glasswork that we still have today, which wrapped around its fireplace at the time.
Do you want to tell them the price?
For
What the city paid for it? Can you read it?
$225,000. That was a lot of money back then. I know it's still a lot of money, but dirt in Northville costs a lot. Believe it or not, today, dirt, doesn't matter if something's on it, is about $1 million to an acre in the city of Northville. Why? Because we don't have any dirt anymore. We're kind of like a mini New York. It's supply and demand. But that was a lot of money, $225,000, $250,000 back then to buy this area. Well worth it, isn't it? Absolutely, absolutely. So this is in 1976, looking at an aerial view, what they want to get done up here, the Allen Terrace site. There's a lot of planning from your father, although your wife took off on me. But that back, they had, I always think you have to know your past to project your future. They wanted a place back then for our seniors. I still want that place today, and to even expand our services, what have you. You're the most important people in town, aren't you? Oh yeah, oh yeah. So then, Allen Monuments, big business in town. Mayor Allen was here before Carmen's dad, and this was a kind of a memorial to him. He was very supportive of trying to do Allen Terrace at the time, and the city, wanted to do a give back to him. Thus, it's named Allen Terrace for Mayor Allen. Mayor Allen owned Allen Monuments, the largest monument area in the state of Michigan. It's inch monuments today. He had his original business down there on Griswold and Main Street, where Dr. Demery's place is today. That's where he lived and had a building right there and had the business right out of the bottom level of that house. Then moved it over on Northville Road. But Mayor Allen did an awful lot for Northville, Michigan. His wife, Mrs. Snow at the time, Betty Snow, her father was a big physician in town, down at the hospital, which is, what's it called today? It used to be the convalescent wishing well. But every baby was born in Northville at the Wishing Well Manor. It was Northville Hospital at the time. Sessions Hospital. If you go, I'm doing a history tour of the Oakwood Cemetery this weekend, and we'll talk about Sessions, who's in that Oakwood Cemetery, and others, but he did an awful lot for Northville. Everybody from about 1910 to about 1961 that was born in Northville, born in Sessions Hospital, to Mr. Snow, Dr. Snow, and Betty Snow, that was her father, and she helped out there and eventually married Mayor Allen, Mike Allen.
Right.
And I think there's pictures I've seen in the hall of Mike Allen here in the hall bit. He was a friend of our family, a friend of my grandparents, great friends of my parents at the time too. He built a new house down on Fairburn Street. He used to live over in Orchard Heights after he moved from where his business was on Griswold and Main Street. Allen Terrace residents questions. I think these are the questions you're asking me to tell you about. So I'm going to try to make sure we handle these questions. And I think when was the water tower constructed? We're going to talk about that. When was the old village school constructed? High Street, dead ends by the houses next to Allen Terrace. Was that always the case? Any stories about the Randolph train? So that is what I heard from you. You want me to talk about. I should know about most of these things. Remember, I grew up 5 generations here, hanging from my grandparents on both sides and my father. And I usually study most of this, and then today, I'm involved with a lot of it still. I think I know the mayor. Go ahead. So the water tower. The water tower was up and running in 1963. By the end of the 50s, when we were putting the high school up here and Northville Swim Club was coming together, the foundations were built for that water tower. Up to that point, we had 2 reservoirs underground right by the water tower. In fact, today we still have 2 500,000 gallon tanks underground. 1 million gallons we have, just a 1,050,000 gallons. We used to bring it from 2 sources in Northville before that tower. One down by Eaton Drive, and 7 Mile, there's a big pond there. We pumped water all the way up. And another one down by Guernsey's, really, we pumped it all the way into those tanks. We're in the midst today. Those tanks are over 100 years old. We still today, up to today, in the next 6 months, we pump water into those tanks, and then we pump water from those tanks into the tower. So eventually, in about 6 months from now, we're going to go water directly into the tower. It'll be more efficient, and those tanks are wearing out, and there's no parts left in the world for them. So I've authorized super duper pumps to go directly into that tank. And we actually pump water at night when it's cheaper, so we don't pump it during the day. We use it all day and that water pressure, and then at night we do it again. We don't make $1 on water. It's a pass-through from the city of Detroit, so we try to economize as much as possible. I know people think that water is like liquid gold around here. We make all that money. We don't make $1 on water. So just so you know. The next thing. Northville High School. So Northville High School was dedicated in March of 1958. I think we played football down at the old football field on Ford Field through the 1962 season. 1963, we went up to the new high school field that you see across from 8 Mile here. That was a pretty modern high school. I went to that high school. It wasn't quite as modern when I went to it in the late 70s, but back in 1958, that was quite something, coming from the old village school downtown to that new modern high school. So that gives you kind of an idea. That was the brochure. In 1959, they broke ground in 1958. Go right ahead. So this is High Street today. People have talked to me about, did it go all the way up? Is that where we're going with that? What is the next? No visual of this. So to answer somebody's, I'm trying to answer the questions that I thought came up here. There was never a street that went straight up. So when you come around the corner on the Lutheran church, where are we? We are right out here. That was just a walk path going up. That walk path was a toboggan hill that came straight down. Just in recent times, in the last decade or so, they've continued up that hill a little bit so they could build some homes and, you know, have a driveway to them. But that was a muddy, crappy path when I was walking up that in the 60s and even early 70s, and some of you might remember, you probably in my era a whole bit. So yeah, that was never a street. It almost can't be. That's where motorcyclists would try to get up there and they would test cars to go up there. It's impossible. It's kind of like coming up from Baseline Road. You couldn't do that either. You know, that is the straight line, Baseline Road to the road behind here on top. So that should answer your question, I believe. Next one. The Randolph Drain. So the Randolph Drain, I know more than I want to know, is a drain authority between Wayne County and Oakland County. And remember, Northville is an area where the headwaters for 4 different counties: Livingston, Wayne County, Oakland County, and Washtenaw County. We have 4 rivers coming through Northville. We have the Upper and Middle Rouge coming together into town. We have the Randolph Drain down here, and we have the Johnson Creek coming from Washtenaw. That's why we're here. We were the first milling area, and you needed that power of the water for the mills to work, the sawmills, the grist mills in the day. There's no electricity. We were number 2 in electronics in production in all of the state of Michigan, with Detroit being number 1 until the 1930s. Why? Because we had all that water power moving the machinery. You have something called the Mill Race Village. Why is it called the Mill Race Village? A mill race is a big pipe going to a smaller pipe. By the time it gets this big, it's like a jet engine moving that wheel around, moving all the machinery. That's the power of the water back then. So that's why Northville's here. And the drain for the Randolph Drain right down the road, that is a drain authority because it starts in Oakland County, comes into Wayne County, eventually goes down to the Rouge River down by Ford Field. We are spending $650,000 on the bridge right here. That's a cul-de-sac, or it's not really a bridge, but it is a bridge. So we're spending about $650,000 on that starting next spring. We got approval from the state of Michigan. I got a special grant. We've never got grants in the history of Northville. We got $8.5 million in the past year because I'm trying to get us involved with a lot of different things from the state level. I was with the governor last Friday. Of course, you probably saw we put all of our flags to half-mast. I had, for Declan, we had to have the sign-off from the governor, and I had to have a little discussion with her on that. So it was great. I said, what, are you going to fire me? No, she didn't fire me. So all was good. So the Randolph Drain goes all the way coming down Taft Road, pretty much all the way from Mayberry State Park, all that water coming down this way. It rushes quite a bit when the water is raining and there's drainage. We're gonna spend about $750,000 where the Randolph drain goes into Ford Field with 3 little waterfalls. We've deteriorated the banks about 8 to 9 feet over the years. We've never really beefed it up. If you look in there, it's called Serenity Point, where the one big waterfall is. We're gonna have 3 cascading little waterfalls there. It'll be a beautiful area to go down there and sit, to listen to the water and the Hobbit. So in total, we'll spend about $1.3 million on the Randolph drain from your road here all the way to Ford Field. So I have the attention of a lot of people in Wayne County and Oakland County to be part of this as partners. They really appreciate that too, the whole bit. But from that, it's important to have that water management, and we've been up in Lansing talking about the support of that in the future. So that hopefully answers your question. These are all facts. These are, you will know more than anybody else in the world here, that both those projects on the Randolph drain will start next spring. It's already been bid out on both of them.
Now, we want to know about bodies that they were found in the Randolph drain.
Oh, we don't talk about that.
I try not to talk about the bodies. And they were looking when they did Northville Downs, were there any bodies underneath there? Okay, let it go. That's another story for the presentation.
So now you kind of got an idea. That's up here at Buckner Hill. I thought I'd whip through kind of the other areas so you see how they're coordinated, and then you can ask me anything you want. So again, Bealtown, Orchard Heights, Historic District, Cabbagetown. Those are the historic areas in town, and this is a little book called Step by Step Through Northville that my dad used to walk people through, and they wrote the book about his walking through the city of Northville, the 4 major burgs. And I was told early on when I was a kid, this is really part of the historic area. You know, it's up here, but today, because you wanted to talk more about it, it's all about Buckner Hill and the new area towns. Did I handle that? Thank you very much. Okay. So Bealtown, Mr. Beal used to build, I'm going to whip through this, so hang on to your hat. So Mr. Beal built Bealtown. That's over by the racetrack. And he had the largest furniture factory in the world for school and church furniture. Like those desks you see in the upper right, all those little desks, if it has a globe on it, it was built in Northville, Michigan. The majority of all those desks in this country and in the world were built in Northville, Michigan. It's unbelievable. When you go to like rummage sales or antique sales, look at it. If it has a globe on it, built in Northville. They had 200 people a shift building these desks back then. That was a lot. So Mr. Beal decided he didn't want people coming in every day on their horses and their wagons and the trains and the trolleys. He's going to build a whole town over there. So that's why it's called Bealtown. He built all those homes between Northville Road and Yerkes and Beale Street, right there next to Northville Downs. And in that area, we talked about Northville was the first milling area, also one of the very first foundries in the state of Michigan, because he needed a foundry to build all the metal works on the side of those desks. Those are all metal. We used to build bells here, and before Amazon and UPS and all these deliveries, there used to be catalogs. You remember this, I'm sure. Montgomery Ward and Sears catalogs. All the scales and a lot of the metalworks in this country came from that foundry that you ordered in those catalogs back then. So it's a big deal. The foundry was one of the oldest in the state of Michigan, and the mills. That's why we're here. That was the foundation. That's where we built all of our stuff. Next. So this is downtown. I always talk about Northville was booming. This looks like about 1899 to me because there's no cars. There's horse and buggies. Trolleys were coming to town. Envision, Northville was booming. We had trolleys coming in, and one trolley went all the way up Griswold to 8 Mile to Farmington to Pontiac. Another one all the way down Northville Road to Plymouth to Detroit. You could get to Detroit in about 55 minutes on these trolleys. That's unbelievable. I mean, sometime today you can't do that with traffic, for God's sakes. I know I can't. So this gives you an idea. Downtown in the later 1800s, horse and buggies. I get a kick out of it. What do you get a kick out of, Brad? A lot of people were complaining about the Downs. Said, oh, we don't want more traffic. We don't want this, that. So I read something from the Northville Record. Everybody's shaking their head, and it said, we don't want more traffic in town. We don't want those homes built here. We don't need more people. It's congestion. And everybody's shaking their head. I said, this is from Bealtown in 1872 in the Northville Record. That's horse and buggies in downtown Northville, but same things. Can't we all get along? Okay, the next one. So this is the school and church furniture for Mr. Beal down there by that Foundry Flask area where the car wash is today. That is Mr. Stinson. He built single-wing planes. The first modern planes were the Cessna Cub today. Took over the technology. Built right there in this factory area where Foundry Flask is. You can see on the right, that's what it looks like today, the buildings. And it's a little bit more to the right of that. And that's where the school and church furniture factory was from Mr. Beal in the upper right. It was a big complex. 200 people a shift. It's a lot of people working in a furniture factory that did school and church furniture each and every day. Shipped them all around the world. Next one. So right in that area, again, we're in Bealtown. In Bealtown was a train station. The train station was right up from where the well was. And that's the way the well used to be, a traditional well. And the Northville well was kind of like the absolute pure spring water. It was the purest water around. And it was called Silver Springs back then. And we are going to rebuild that well to make it look like it did. I know there's a group in town that redid it. It looks great. It's a little octagon, foo-foo little building. It's going to look like a well again. So we're going to do that next year for our bicentennial. Everything we're doing, we're getting ready for our bicentennial. But Rotary, bless their souls, rebuilt it. And, that was good to make sure it's still around. But we will build it exactly the way it was traditionally. People came from all over. It was kind of like the Northville absolute pure spring water. The finest hotels and the finest restaurants served Northville spring water. All the trains served Northville spring water back in the day. So, yeah. Next one. Again, down there in Bealtown, that's where Northville Downs was. Where Northville Downs is, that was the largest fairgrounds in the state of Michigan. In fact, the Wayne County Fair was at Northville Downs till 1944. It was larger than the state fair in town. And that's why the river they put underneath in 1908, I believe there's a Swamp Act in this country, and if you needed more land, you could put the river underneath, and that's what they did in the big tube. Today, we're going to daylight that for the future, and we've already done the new channel that's going down River Street. It's called River Street because there used to be a river right there next to it, so we can't have a river walk without a river. So we have a river again. But with this, down there at Northville Downs, again, they needed more space for all the activities for the fair, so they buried the river back then. It was a big deal. And on that corner, that is the DTE substation. You see that big smokestack? That's the Globe Furniture Power Station. Then DTE took that over. That's there today, right on Griswold. Go right ahead. We used to be the ski jump capital of the state of Michigan. Unbelievable, was it? Until 1929, world record holders would come to Northville, Michigan to ski jump. Remember, we're the highest point in Wayne County. Where is it, people say? If you go down 7 Mile and stop right where Heinz Drive is and look to the west, there's a big hill. On top of that hill, there's an 80-foot platform they built. It would go down and land towards Custard Time or Good Time Party Store. It was a perfectly straight road. That was the landing strip up until the late 20s, early 30s. That wasn't a road until the late 50s. That was just the landing strip for the ski jump hill back then. When I was a kid,
a long time ago. There were still bricks and wood around there. That's all been cleaned up. There's some different history markers. We're going to make more history markers about that and talk about that in the future for our bicentennial. But this is Detroit Free Press in 1924. That's a ski jumper in the middle of the air. What you're doing, you're facing right towards Good Time Party Store would be to the left, and where McDonald Ford would be to the right. Where those people are way down there, that's by the river. You wouldn't get that far on the landing strip. You see the guy in the middle of the air on the right. If you see that little tower, that's like where the state hospital was. Now it's Legacy Park, way up there to the upper left of that picture. Okay, that's more information I want to go. Historic District. We're really in the Historic District. I know we're in Buckner Hill. Historic District is over here, Randolph and Dunlap in our downtown area. Let's go to the next one. In the Historic District are churches and our schools, you can see in downtown. Northville survived when the Meads brothers, we talked about mills, there's an even bigger mill. There's a 3 or 4 story mill that the Meads brothers built, and it was called Waterford, Michigan. Had a train station, everything else, right where Meads Mill School is. They had a town, they had a cemetery. What they didn't have were churches. Need some churches, got to keep that spirituality. We have all the churches and we had the schools right here. So that gives you an idea. We had a church square and we had different school squares. This is downtown again. Looking at it, very later 1800s, when the trolleys first came through, trolleys came right through the middle of the road coming downtown. And we had a band shell at the end. I think we're looking from the band shell looking down. That would be the jewelry store to the left and Chinetti's to the right. So we're looking east from the middle of the road on Main Street and Center, looking towards Town Square. The theater would be the middle of the picture to the left. Go ahead. So this is looking the opposite way. This is looking towards City Hall. And you can see you're looking right towards Main Street and Center, that big tower with the bell, that used to be where we put our fire engines. On the left there, that was Ambler's Hotel, which is on the corner. Not there anymore. It was caught in a fire in the early 30s or so, where it says bowling alley on the right. As my grandfather was a barber in town, had a 2-lane bowling alley there on that side. We own that building. And where Baby is on this side, that was my other grandfather who was an electrician in town. That was the second store. He bought that after Dillinger kicked in the door and stole all the guns from the hardware. They didn't have any insurance. My grandfather bought it from them. So I grew up knowing that store back when I was a kid. So if you look at this, I'm a car guy. This is all pretty much Model Ts, no Model A's. So this is about 1919. Maybe 1918, someplace in there. Go right ahead. On Dunlap, again in the historic area, a lot of articles in the record. They used to race horses on the straightaway from Center Street all the way down to Rogers Street. And they would bet on the horses on Sundays. The ladies didn't like it very much on Sundays, running horses down the middle of Dunlap. There's a lot of articles. They would put purses and money on different races, and people would come from all over to do a straightaway race, like a quarter-mile race going down there. Yeah. Ladies still don't like that today. So again, this is a look all the way, that same look and feel from looking down Dunlap, looking west, right from Center Street. Let's go to the next one. And this was my grandfather's house on Dunlap and High Street. He was the barber in Northville. He had little things in the Northville record. I don't know what year that, 1931 that was. That, come get your hair cut, blah, blah, blah. Later on, when he had a stroke, they built on that, I call it the tar paper shack part to the left, and he would cut hair in the late 50s and early 60s at the house because he couldn't really get downtown anymore at that time. So that house is still there. I kept that house up to about 1983,
and they have a whole new porch on that, but right down the street, where are we? Right down the street that way, 2 streets, the right-hand side. That's on the corner of Dunlap and High Street. Next one, in the back, that's the Baptist Church. And this is the electric shop. On one of these, we don't probably have that book, on Northville, the history of Northville, on the cover was the place, and it said where Bruce Turnbull, my father, was born. That was building up to the upper left. That was from the mid-1800s, and that's Star Laundry. Then eventually that was North Electric Shop, and you can see the little sign in the middle. That's that same building. Later on, and oh yeah, that's on the bottom left. It says History of Northville. That's that shop. In the cover, it said Bruce Turnbull was born there in 1919. Eventually, they bought the Ware building. The Ware building is where Baby is today. That was a hardware store, like I said, where Dillinger came to town with his boys, kicked in the back door, and stole everything. My grandfather bought that from the bank because the Wares didn't have insurance on the building at the time. That was about 1932. That's a pretty modern building back then. Oh, I didn't know we had it. So right there, the Ware building was built in 29 and broke into in about 32. I grew up knowing that store as a North Electric Shop. A lot of activity in town. The Purple Gang would come through town. The Purple Gang had the Northville Golf Course, which was on 7 Mile and Newburgh. The Purple Gang had different homes in downtown Detroit. Ironically, my son had a house in Detroit, and the 2 houses next to him were owned by the Purple Gang, and they were connected. One was the house of ill repute, whatever that means, and the other one was the gambling house. They would have a tunnel underneath connecting the 2 homes, and a big hallway in the middle. So you went in one way, and you came out the other. So yeah, a lot of activity, and why would that be? Because a lot of people, gangsters, people rum running, in the Depression and, when there was Prohibition, between Chicago and Detroit was kind of a hotbed of things, and Northville's right off of Michigan Avenue kind of deal, so they would come out here. But yeah, my parents were friends. The secretary of the Purple Gang ended up inheriting Northville Golf Course. Even when I was a kid, into the 70s, late 70s, early 80s, Northville Golf Course was there where the medical center is today on Northville Road and 7 Mile. Next one. So we were kind of the capital for cures. If you had addictions, drug addictions or alcohol addictions, there was a cure. It was a gold serum. They would inject you. People start laughing. University of Michigan today still, they experiment with different metallics in your body. People would come from all over the Yarnell Gold Cure building, which is just restored right in downtown across from where the Early Bird is by Starbucks. That is big put together in its old glory. I think they're spending about $2 million across the street. The old boarding house was just redone. People would come in via train, spend about 3 weeks here, get injected every day, go to the boarding house, and they'd be cured of their different addictions because you didn't want it anymore once you started getting that in your system. But it's unbelievable, but we were kind of like the Betty Ford Clinic before there was a Betty Ford Clinic. People would come from all over, stagecoach and trains and trolleys to come into Northville on that. Next one, we always had a band show. A lot of activities in downtown Northville. That is right in the middle of Main Street and Center Street, the upper left. I like this picture because you have a trolley in there, you have old cars, you still have the trains coming in to the left. That is really Genetti's building if you look to the left. A lot was going on. That's in 1919 in downtown North. Remember, downtown Northville was the same size then as it is today. In this whole area, Northville was about as big. Now we have the township all around us, but we were a booming place back then. We were number 2 in the state. Just about every governor started their launch to be the governor right on this bandstand here. So just about every governor in the state of Michigan came to Northville and launched their campaign here. We've had, in recent terms, just President Bush and President Biden I brought to town about 7 weeks ago or so. But a lot of people have come through Northville. We're really the downtown for about 300,000 people. We're the downtown for all of Novi. We're the downtown for Livonia. We're the downtown for all the communities in this area. So, there, next one. And this was the old sweet shop, Paul Foligno's sweet shop, and they moved that shop down to the historic village, and they squished it down a little bit. You can see they condensed it down, so they shrunk wrapped it, and they went from the up to the top picture to the right to the bottom. But the same building, they used the different wood structure and just made it a little bit less in the width. But yeah, Paul Foligno was on the council and ran for mayor at one time. He was not one of those 6 mayors, but did a lot for Northville, Michigan. That was right downtown on Main Street, right pretty close to the clock. It was Little Caesar's Pizza later on when I was younger, but a lot went on there. You can see this is in the 50s, 1954. A lot going on. I'm sure the jukeboxes were nice and loud in the whole bit, and the shakes. Next one. So in 1907, there's a big old crash, and it was up in Salem, and what did they call it?
The Salem train wreck.
Salem train wreck, but it was in Northville, Michigan, so it was decent close to Salem, but the Salem train wreck, one of the worst train wrecks in the history of the state, one of the worst up to that point. A freight train ran into a passenger train head-on out there. There was a group coming from Ionia going down to Belle Isle for the day for a trip on a passenger train. A freight train was coming up from Plymouth at the time, and they ran into each other. Why? It's a big deal in Northville. It was called the Northville Roller Rink, which the rink was over behind the theater. And this was a national deal. It was in all the papers. Who was to blame? You always have to have somebody to blame. So the case went on for about a month and a half, and it was in every paper nationally in the whole bit. So it was talked all about the Salem train wreck, one of the worst train wrecks in the history of the United States, 1907.
Still the worst in the state.
Still the worst in the state, says the historian of the mill race. That's right. Thank you very much.
How many fatalities?
Let's see. I think there's 47 and about the same injuries at the time. So upwards of 100 were injured or killed. And later on, many of those injured passed away too because of all their injuries. I mean, it collapsed the cars one by one because a head-on, 2 engines going 50 miles an hour apiece went into each other. So it just collapsed all the cars. People were thrown all around the whole bit.
Who did they finally blame?
So they blamed, let me think, the conductor was okay. The people on the freight train didn't hear the order quite right, and they kept going. Is that correct? Somebody on the freight train was convicted that he didn't read the order right, and from that, you always have to blame somebody. So it was the freight train that didn't read the order right at the time. The passenger train was on the right track at the right time. The other ones didn't read the paperwork quite right. Next one.
What year was it?
1907.
And because of that, they used lined paper. Because they didn't use lined paper, so he misread the order by going down too far. He thought he had more time, but now they use lined paper.
After that, everything in the railroad had different line paper, different lines, line by line on it.
With steam locomotives back then.
That's correct. And they were heavy. They were big boys. And they exploded, and imagine 2 steam locomotives hitting each other at 50 miles an hour apiece. Not a good thing. So 100-mile-an-hour collision. This is Detroit Edison building, still in the historic area. Thomas Edison came to town and dedicated this building at the time. They're renovating that right now. That is on Dunlap and Center Street today. I think we're going to put a statue out there with Thomas Edison on it for our bicentennial too. Next one. That is right on the other corner, the opposite corner of where the Edison building is. That is on Dunlap and Center on the southeast corner. That was the largest opera house pretty much in the state of Michigan, 850 seats. My parents had their ceremonies for graduation and other activities in that that whole building. That Mr. Little, who was the editor of the Northville Record, started building that in the mid-1800s. Took him about 5 or 6 years to complete it. Henry Ford almost bought that, wanted to buy it to bring it to Greenfield Village, and they wanted too much money. And if anybody's worked for Ford Motor Company, they're kind of cheap. So at the day, I'm a Ford guy. Ended up, Henry Ford did not buy it. He said, I am not buying it for that amount. You can take that down brick by brick. And that's what happened in the 1950s. They took that whole opera house down. It was one of the most grand opera houses in the state of Michigan. People came from all over the state, stagecoaches and trains to see operas and singers and everything in the opera house. Next one. Orchard Heights. Orchard Heights is between Roger Street and Clement, 7 Mile and Main Street. That was the orchards in town. I grew up in Orchard Heights. So the old Eaton House on let's see, Roger Street, that was the farmhouse for the whole area. The Casterlines lived there, the Atchisons lived there before them, but that was the old Eaton House in the 1800s. And the whole back area was all different trees and berries. In fact, today there's still trees in that area. Some crabapple trees, some pear trees, some cherry trees. Back in the day, they're pretty gnarly, but some are over 100 years old, some of those trees in that Orchard Heights area. But that was all the orchards. I grew up in the house to the right, the original farmhouse, still there today on Roger Street, is the one on the left, all stones from the farm there. He built a house right behind him. That was the old Eaton House on Eaton Drive, the first one. That's the house I grew up in. My parents were the second owners of that house. That was built in about 1918 on the right. And then they built one more house to the right of that for the grandmother. Then they subdivided the whole farm, dividing it, and now we're selling all the apples out there too. Next one. In Orchard Heights was OLB. In the 1920s, I think 1922, 23, 50 families put money together to build a clapboard church. They had to have a Protestant buy the land because they didn't want a Catholic in town, a new Catholic church. The original Catholic masses were at my grandparents' home on my mother's side. That home you saw earlier on Dunlap and High Street. 50 families in town put money together to build the clapboard church to the left. My parents were one of 100 families that built OLB to the right. It's a really neat picture in the upper right. That's the new OLB and the old clapboard church in the background. That's where the parking lot is today. Then it looks something like the bottom. So that is in Orchard Heights. In Orchard Heights, on the base of Roger Street and 7 Mile, was a porcelain condensed milk company of the Rogers family. We patented condensed milk in Northville, Michigan. Condensed milk built a Rogers Mansion. The Rogers Mansion is still around today. It's called Shiro's Restaurant. It's right there on 9 Mile and Novi Road area. The Rogers condensed milk money built that in the 1800s. So now you know the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say. Also in Orchard Heights, had the first area for fish hatcheries in the country, had 14 different ponds. Every brown trout in North America can be labeled back to Northville, Michigan. We imported it in the 1800s from Germany. They had 14 ponds. There was more trout at Northville Fish Hatchery ponds and all the buildings than there were people in the state of Michigan. There were 2 to 3 million trout at all times, and they would ship that out all over the country via train and wagon, and then these eventually truck and airplane. It was a booming place. A guy called Clark came to town. He was one of the first superintendents. He had another little area on the other side of Detroit. They liked him so much they called the town after him. Clarkston. So he started here in Northville. Again, there's one pond there today. There's about 14 different ponds. My parents would even talk when they were young. One of the ponds they would make as a swimming hole every summer. They would clean that out. People would swim in there. And there's different swim lanes of fish. They would clean different things out. You can see in the bottom left, there's a beautiful area to walk around on different Sundays. There's only one building remaining, and that's the superintendent's house. That's right across the street there where the fish hatchery park is on 7 Mile. That dates back to about 1890. That was one of the last buildings built in that area. Next one. Where Rural Hill is, and we, the city, own our two cemeteries, Oakwood on Katy Street and at Rural Hill. Rural Hill, when you first go in there, a lot of clay, and originally a lot of bricks in Michigan were built from that clay. A lot of the bricks from the state capitol came from this clay area where you're going to Rural Hill. Northville was around 10 years before Michigan was a state. Been around here for a long time, since 1820s, finally incorporated in 1827. So a lot of the materials from Northville built other communities in the Michigan area. And the Northville Labs, Con Langfield, one of the first millionaires in town, that was a lot of money back then. He imported pure vanilla from South America, so he did all the vanilla extract, and pretty much the Americas got it from South America early on. He did a lot for Northville. He's a supporter of the band. Still, there's a trust to buy all their uniforms from Con Langfield. And that house, his old house, is still there on Rogers and 7 Mile. Doesn't look great, but that was one of the first millionaires' homes in Northville, Michigan. Next one. And that's my dad hunting in late high school. You know, you go to school, bring his rifle and shoot some pheasants, shoot some rabbits on the way home. He grew up at 222 Fairbrook. Back in that day, across the street, that was a huge pond, and that pond went all the way to Rural Hill at the time. He'd put his canoe on the other side. 7 Mile didn't go through there until the late 1950s. We talked about on one side where the ski jump hill was, from about Northville Downs where St. Lawrence Estates is, all the way up to Rogers. That was a big pond. In fact, Henry Ford put a little train track on top and kept the dike going all the time. Henry Ford spent a lot of time in town. He had his honeymoon here in the 1880s. He loved it so much down by the river. That's why he bought the land where Ford Field is and where the Mill Race Village is, and donated that to the city. On the Justice of the Peace, I've done about 70 marriage ceremonies right down there in Mill Race Village, and we talk about Henry Ford and how much he loved Northville. He brought his buddies. We all have buddies in life, don't we? He brought his buddies called the Vagabond Group here all the time. That would be Harvey Firestone, Firestone Tires, Thomas Edison, and John Burroughs, and environmentalists. They would all come to Northville. In fact, where Rebecca's is today was Cloverdale's back then. Henry Ford was known as a big tipper there in the whole bit. And a lot of famous people came through town. In the day, there was boxing rings, and who was the boxer that was here in Northville? Joe Louis. So Joe Louis trained at Northville Downs, and he would run all around town. He was made an unofficial Northvillian. Everybody loved Joe Louis in town too. Next one. And the last one's here. Cabbagetown. Cabbagetown is down by Ford Field, going back that way towards Baseline Road. My son just bought a house on Gray Street down there. It's called Cabbagetown because a lot of English and Irish, and there's a huge cabbage field back in the 1800s. People didn't really like that nomenclature being Cabbagetown. They wanted to name it something else, but it's always stuck. That's called Cabbagetown because the Irish and the English live down there. Huge cabbage fields. And Mrs. Rayson, that stone is in Oakwood Cemetery. She had a home down there in Cabbagetown, and she was going around over at her neighbor's house, and all of a sudden looked up, a big old icicle came down and killed her right there. And it says that right on her tombstone, killed by an icicle. Today we'd be suing everybody. Back then we just put that into the tombstone. But next
It's a
one.
little more poetic than that.
It did. So, do you want to say it says, met death from ice falling from the roof of a neighbor's home. Is that more poetic? Thank you very much. So that's what it says, and that's what it is in the cemetery.
And they are the ones with the cabbage field.
And
George and Emma Racing.
George and Emma Racing had the cabbage field. See? Keeps you straight on this. Thank you very much. The big mansion right there on Griswold and 8 Mile. Anybody who's been anybody in Northville since the 1800s, there has been a mansion or a large home on that location since the mid-1800s. A lot of the mayors, Mr. Beale, who was the president, so we've gone from being the president of the village to the mayor of the village to the mayor of the town. The Beals lived in here, the Yerkes lived in here. Later on, it was the Chase Mansion, Chase Shatterproof Glass. They were friends of my parents a long time ago. And then Don Massey. Some people just say, oh, that's the Don Massey house. Well, it was a lot of things before it was the Don Massey house, but that is a beautiful piece of property that's living and learning today for children with some disabilities. I do a lot of volunteer work out there, but it's a beautiful piece of property. And ironically, it's in the city of Novi. That is not even Northville. They pay taxes in Novi. I can't believe it. But so I know that is a gateway to Northville, and anybody who's been anybody in Northville has lived there. That is today in the city of Novi. Palmer Cider Mill, one of the oldest cider mills in the state, just got ranked as one of the top cider mills by Channel 4 after the Civil War. 2 Civil War vets came out, and Mr. Parmenter was one of those. Started the cider mill 1873. It's been going ever since. It was in the family for over 100 years, and today it is still being run, not in the same family, but it is a great place. Get some cider. They have a little brewery or winery next door with music on it, the same family. It's a happening place down there in Baseline, but one of the oldest cemeteries around. The actual oldest business in the state of Michigan is Northville Lumber, dating back to 1827, dating all the way back when Northville first was incorporated into a city. That old Yerkes was the name of the owner. Yerkes, we think we've been around here a long time, 5 generations. They've been around Northville for about 9 generations. In fact, Northville Lumber is still in the Yerkes family. Stu Olford, his mother was a Yerkes, so he is gone and kept that going on. It's a family business. There's a couple of Yerkes homes right there on Baseline. Right next to Northville Lumber, there's an old Yerkes farmhouse at the 400 acres behind Ammerman and what have you, used to be the Yerkes farm. I don't think we have a picture of that house, but that's another Yerkes house right on Baseline Road. And just ending up, the last thing that's in the Cabbagetown is where we moved all our historic homes. We were so fortunate that Henry Ford donated that land that he used to walk up and down with Clary, loved being there by the river. We have decided, he helped us in that concept, to have our own little greenfield village. So each one of those homes were someplace in town, and we moved in there. When I was a kid, in the late 70s and late 60s and early 70s, I remember them moving those homes one by one. My parents were involved with that. They'd have to take the wires down, and these homes are, these churches and these buildings are coming through town. It was pretty neat back then. A lot of excitement, a little Northville. So it's a beautiful place. Right where the valve plant is, Albert Kahn designed, this is the second valve plant on that location. Henry Ford bought this location in 1919. This was a milling area and a business where they made a lot of dowels in the whole bed. He moved all the machinery, every valve for Ford Motor Company, for every engine, from 1919 to 1983 were built in Northville, Michigan. From Fordson tractors to Model Ts to Model As to T-Birds and Mustangs. Every valve, those things are going up and down, like air in and air out and gas in and out and exhaust. Every valve made in Northville, Michigan
from Ford Motor Company right here. And Albert Kahn redesigned the factory, like I said, in the 1930s. My grandfather wired it, I'm told. And this was the superintendent's home, which is Dr. Demery's home across the street on Griswold and Main Street. So that home is still there today, almost looking, as Gloria says, it did 100 years ago. Next one. Ford Field, very historic. We played our high school football games there till 1962. The All-American from Michigan State University, Steve Juday, played right there at Ford Field. He was one of the greatest athletes ever out of Northville. It was a group of young athletes their senior year. They won all their football games. They won all their basketball games. They won all their baseball games. The same group of guys. That has never happened in the history of Northville. 1962. Quite a group of people. A lot went on to college to play, and he went on to Michigan State, won the Rose Bowl and the national championship. Steve Juday, quite a guy, still around today in the Athletic Hall of Fame for the state of Michigan, of course in the Northville Hall of Fame. My brother later on in 1966 went on to Michigan State. He was a linebacker for Michigan State with Bubba Smith. My brother thought he was pretty big, 225, 6'2", very muscular. He went up there, a guy called Bubba Smith was up there. He was about 6'8" and about 300 pounds and quicker, bigger, and stronger. But so he used to go around in his car once in a while. But but he was not in the same league as Bubba Smith. Bubba Smith was one of the most outstanding players up there, and he was up there when Steve Juday was there, just very young. Next one. And right there at this is where you see some apartments today, kind of involved. So we have a little different architecture these days. But where those apartments are used to be the Ely Fuel and Ice Company. When my mom was young and she grew up on Dunlap Street, there's really not much electricity. She would go down and buy ice to put in the ice box, to keep things cold. She would go down with a wagon in the 1920s, and get a big chunk of ice, and they put in the ice box, and that would last for a while, But they would cut the ice from the mill pond over there, and Ely's would sell that, and they would put it with sawdust all around it, and then later on they sold coal and different fuel oil, but that was Ely's. And Mrs. Ely is still around on Ely Drive. She has a house right not too far away, and I go visit her once in a while. She's an old-timer from Northville. She's in her 90s now, I believe. My dad was one of the oldest Mohicans at 99, but now she's around. And last, but I think, but not least, this is an aerial view of what they wanted the mill race to look like. And guess what? It pretty much looks just like that today when they got all the buildings. That was the concept. It's a great place, especially in fall. I would suggest take a look down there. We just bricked the whole thing. We were able to get a grant for about half the cost of what it was going to cost. I do a lot of weddings down there, and it's a really sloppy area when it rains for the brides. I feel bad for the white dresses. Now it's all bricked. It looks like it's always been that way. Take a look, walk around. The colors are outstanding in the fall. You can sit there and listen to the river on one side, the Rouge, and see the trees. I would highly suggest just take a drive down there, sit in the parking lot. You can tell them it's okay. You can drive up on that brick and go around. Okay, let it go. So tell them the mayor said you could drive up there if you have a hard time getting out of the car. Julie knows what President Lake's house is. She's the archivist down there. I always say this. We, the city, own the dirt and we own all the buildings. So tell them the mayor said it's okay to drive around there. Okay. Is there anything else?
The mayor will pay the ticket.
The mayor will pay the ticket. I give you the get out of jail free card. So hopefully you learned a little bit about Northville, talked a little bit more about Buckner Hills than I normally do, but thank you very much. I appreciate it. I will open it up for any questions you may or may not have on your mind. Yes, sir.
A couple events coming up this weekend at Oakwood Cemetery. And also, listen to this, everybody, Cars and Coffee next Saturday from 8 to 10.
That's
Talk
right.
about
So
that.
2 things that was brought up. This Saturday, there's going to be some tours of the old Oakwood Cemetery, and the mayor is the tour guide. We have 5 different stations with different actors that talks about different families and different things in there. We have Civil War veterans. We have American Revolutionary War veterans. It's one of the oldest cemeteries in the state. We are investing to rebuild, clean every stone in Oakwood Cemetery between now and 2026. So it really needs it. You know, we're putting a wrought iron fence, and it's something that I believe the city has let go a little bit. We are trying to do the right thing for the future, because in our bicentennial, that being one of the stops, and we'll have history markers to talk about what those trees are seeing, what some of those families are in there. So we're investing in the future in that cemetery. Then we're going to clean up all the stones. And this is a big deal. Some stones have to be totally rebuilt. Some are cleaned up. Some are brought up out of the ground. You know, some have broken over. We are looking at every stone in there. So it's the least we can do for the respect of those that have come before. We're always on the shoulders of those before us, and we have to remember that. So that is the one thing. So on Saturday from 4 to 8.
The
Is that correct?
The second Saturday.
Yeah. So this Saturday from 4 to 8 is the tours at the cemetery, and it's put on by the Art House. You know, just go in there and sign there. It's a little foo-foo thing. You got to sign up and maybe pay $1 to them. I'm free, so they get a really good deal. The second thing you mentioned, we have a car show. If you ever want to go to a car show, you just drive in there. You don't have to walk around too much. The second Saturday of every month is behind Old Village School, right by the community center, by the library. It's a great car show. It's the mayor's car show. So we have up to sometimes 180 cars, usually about 100 different cars. The next car show is a week from Saturday, and that is officially the last car show of the year. We might have an informal one in November, but it runs from May through October. But the second Saturday, and we provide all the cookies, all the coffee, all the danishes, all for free. The mayor does that for you. So come on down there nice and early. If you don't like cars, get some coffee, you know, pull up there, get something to eat in the morning. That is a week from Saturday. It's in the morning, 8 to 10 o'clock. 8 to 10 o'clock. Get there early. Does that handle that? Good. Any other questions of life out there tonight? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, you said that Northville was a city or a village before the state of Michigan.
Yes.
So was it just Northville, USA?
So, Northville was incorporated in 1827. It was the North Village in the Plymouth Township area. So every municipality is usually 6 by 6 square miles. Our 6 by 6 square miles is Plymouth, Plymouth Township, Northville, and Northville Township. That is the whole encompassment. In Livonia, they're 36 square miles. Canton is 36 square miles at 6 by 6. We were, back then, as large as Plymouth, and they wanted incorporated. No, we want our own deal. We were the North Village in that 36 square miles, and they had a big meeting in town, and Mr. Dunlap owned a bunch of land, and Mr. Katie owned a bunch of land, and some people want to call it Dunlapville. It just doesn't roll off the lips very well. You know, Katieville, no. It was the North Village, thus Northville, Michigan. So ourself and Plymouth, yes, so it was called Northville, and we were incorporated as a township with Plymouth in 1827. We became a city in 1955. It was reasons with the Downs back then. We were a village officially in 1867 or something of that nature, but we were incorporated as this whole township in 1827. Thus, when we celebrated our centennial, we celebrated that in 1927, because that's when this township, which we're the North Village of, was incorporated. That's why we're having our bicentennial in 2027. Hopefully that answers that. A lot of people get confused on that. it's the same as Plymouth, but we're the North Village in that 36 square miles. So, other questions? Yes, sir.
So when Northville was incorporated in 1827, were there Native American people here at that time?
Sure. So early on, there's stories. We don't have the first 100 years of Northville, do we? So there's a book that talked about different Huron Indians on that side and kind of southwest, over towards Ypsilanti. Absolutely. If you look at the history tree that we just did behind City Hall, so backing up, we had one of the oldest elm trees in the state of Michigan. It's an award-winning elm tree, hit by lightning, started rotting on the top. We have a 30-foot elm tree, largest one in the state. We have carved all the history markers, and we have some things about the Indians and about the natural wildlife in this area. And if you walk around that, right behind City Hall, you'll know all the things that were built in Northville. And on top, there's a big old Mustang because we're the Northville Mustangs. So absolutely, early on, there were Indians in the area, but they kind of stayed to themselves, closer by the Huron River, I was told, and it talked about that in the Northville the first 100 years. And they talked about once in a while different farmers would see an Indian come through. It was their land, it was all their land at the time, and a lot of the settlers came here from the East Coast, from New York and New Jersey, and came down the Great Lakes and came to Detroit and out. But absolutely, but not too many by then. A lot went up in northern Michigan, north of even Harbor Springs, and they were one of the few Indians didn't go on a reservation at the time because they were so far away, right up that area, north of Harbor Springs, all the way up to Mackinac Island. There's a huge area, the Adawa, were up there. I think that's the rest of the story on that. Yes, sir.
My wife is at Northville Manor. I understand it used to be a hospital.
Absolutely.